We are conditioned to view billion-dollar philanthropy as the ultimate expression of human kindness. It looks like global capitalists simply giving back. But a forensic analysis of massive charitable flows reveals a sophisticated geopolitical strategy. Humanitarian optics are frequently used to camouflage the installation of foreign control. This is weaponized benevolence. Its primary objective is to bypass sovereign defenses and systematically dismantle local self-sufficiency from the inside out. The deployment of charitable capital on this scale is rarely a one-time relief effort. It is a calculated multi-phase maneuver designed to install permanent dependency. For a geopolitical strategist, unscrutinized free resources cannot be viewed as charity. They act as a leveraged buy-in to a sovereign nation's future. The systemic mechanics of modern philanthropy are not a new invention. They represent the perfection of a century-old strategy for institutional capture. The origins of this specific playbook trace back to David Rockefeller in the early 20th century, using private wealth to secure a geopolitical negotiation seat. Today, the execution of that exact blueprint is highly visible in massive sovereign grants, anchored by figures like Bill Gates, aiming for absolute technocratic control. The core of this playbook relies on an alchemical process. Private charitable capital is quietly transmuted directly into a system of global governance. Executing this transmutation in the modern era requires an immense institutional footprint, functioning as the contemporary seat of this structural power. This historical legacy of financial flows allows private elites to leapfrog traditional statecraft. They install a hidden architecture of governance without ever having to face a public election. The blueprint begins with Phase 1, the psychological shield, a tactic that heavily exploits global catastrophes. Foundations use the urgency of a crisis response to create a sovereign entry point. They bypass border protocols and embed within a nation's internal infrastructure. This entry is made possible by a specific cognitive bias known as the halo effect. The sheer scale of a multi-billion-dollar donation generates a psychological shield that immediately neutralizes critics. This halo effectively disables the legislative scrutiny, democratic oversight, and regulatory investigations that would normally accompany any foreign intervention. The public perceives an altruistic partnership. The strategic reality is the establishment of deep, unshakable institutional trust. By the time the emergency subsides, the donor has already successfully bypassed the legal defenses of the state. The halo effect is the active engineering of vulnerability, ensuring the recipient cannot resist the extractive secondary agenda that follows. Phase 2 is the physical engineering of dependency. The donor aggressively replaces community-governed open-source tools with foreign-owned proprietary subscriptions. This visualizes the first step of a three-phase economic conquest. Entry. This is achieved through the deliberate dumping of free goods. Local producers are burdened by labor and material costs. They simply cannot compete with a price point of zero, resulting in total price suppression. Next comes Phase 2, erosion. The broader local economic ecosystem collapses, taking domestic supply chains and skilled labor down with it. This infrastructure collapse causes a lobotomization of local technical intelligence. The community loses its inherent ability to repair, modify, or evolve its own systems. Finally, Phase 3, consolidation. Domestic competition is entirely neutralized. The nation is transformed into a captive node in a foreign monopoly supply chain, completely dependent on the donor for basic survival. The macroeconomic consequence is severe. It creates a permanent rentier state and a lasting loss of long-term GDP growth. This economic hollowing and technical lobotomization engineers a state of structural desperation. It makes the infiltration of national governance an inevitability. Phase 3 executes cabinet infiltration via a silent, invasive vanguard of soft power. We can see the strategic disadvantage of democracy here. Highly mobile private capital operates against the deliberate, slow oversight of public institutions. Private capital sets facts on the ground during crises, long before a legislature can even convene to debate them. Under the guise of technical assistance, NGO advisors are strategically embedded directly into cabinet seats to draft national law from the inside. They utilize conditional funding, making essential aid contingent upon the nation passing specific legislative reforms that favor the donor's interests. By infiltrating the cabinet and leveraging conditional funding, the foreign donor effectively replaces the local voter as the primary architect of the nation's future. Phase 4 focuses on extracting the modern era's most valuable resource, targeting the biometric and behavioral DNA of the citizenry. This is the new tithe of the digital era, a mandatory tax where the most vulnerable populations pay for survival with their digital identities. This flowchart maps the data feedback loop. Stage 1 is harvesting vulnerability, where a nation is forced to lower its data protection standards during a health or education crisis just to receive aid. Stage 2 is algorithmic refinement. The extracted data is fed into proprietary models to build predictive signatures that dictate the future behavioral outcomes of the population. Stage 3 is the necessity loop. The donor uses these predictive models as circular proof to convince the global community that the population is incapable of self-governance. This continuous loop converts human vulnerability into a proprietary asset, permanently stripping the recipient nation of future agency. When a foreign entity owns the biometric history of a nation's youth, the state has failed its sovereign duty. An immediate defense is required. National leaders and strategists must move from passive receipt to a rigorous forensic mandate to evaluate foreign assistance. The essential toolkit for this defense is the sovereignty audit, structured around 3 specific pillars. The first requirement is community ownership. This mandates that physical assets remain locally owned, and foreign advisors are strictly barred from policymaking roles. The second is technological sovereignty. This demands the use of open-source tools that the community can independently repair rather than relying on proprietary subscriptions. The third is economic fortification, prioritizing aid that procures from domestic producers rather than bankrolling their destruction with imported free goods. Applying this audit prevents the lobotomization of sovereign capabilities, ensuring that generosity empowers a peer rather than engineering a permanent subscriber. The ultimate legislative antidote to the philanthropic blueprint is the blind trust model. Under this model, donors must provide unrestricted funds and legally relinquish all control, strings, and data rights the exact moment funds are transferred. This total relinquishment of control is the singular path to a peer-to-peer partnership that actually honors sovereign dignity. For the geopolitical strategist, unscrutinized free resources are frequently the most expensive assets a nation can ever acquire, costing them their long-term independence. Benevolence, when weaponized, is the most dangerous tool of conquest, precisely because it arrives as an act of kindness.